You gotta understand, the UFC has a lot of great fighters. They've only got a couple scary ones.
Alex Pereira, people are scared of him.
You look at him, you're like, well, what are you made out of?
3 years ago, he wasn't on the f***ing roster, and now he's a 2-division champion.
It was like when Thanos showed up, and he's just collecting Infinity Stones.
The one that has the best shot of beating Alex Pereira is Magomed Ankalaev.
Alex, stop running away for me.
The UFC has always taken pride in delivering the fights us fans want to see. Well, for the most part. But in a sport where business and pure entertainment often take priority in dictating matchups, some transcend all that. Some are just inevitable.
Следующим я его загоню в угол, чтобы у него выхода не было другого.
They didn't tell you to fight him, you asked for him.
A galera tem que me agradecer. Mas eu pedi, eu dei a chance de ele falar isso, só isso.
On March 8th, in the main event of UFC 313, one of those inevitable showdowns finally arrives. An otherworldly champion, a terrifying Brazilian bomber who's cleared out nearly every relevant contender, faces the final boss of challengers, a dynamic Dagestani long overdue for another shot at gold. One who brings a unique danger that makes this fight all the more intriguing.
Dagestani wrestling is the hardest thing for a kickboxer like Pereira to deal with, and I've played with you. He's not a wrestler.
But if he stands with them, I mean, why? Why would you stand with him?
He's just bullshitting.
Every fighter thinks they have a plan when they go in there. I'm going to take him down. We're going to see what happens in this fight. We're going to see if Ankalaev can take those shots.
But first, the co-main event promises its own brand of violence. Pure, unfiltered carnage. A human highlight machine built for destruction meets another fearless striker back on his comeback crusade.
I just think the UFC wants to see someone die. They want to see someone go down. They want to see blood.
I mean, that's a dream just bleed matchup. I just hope both guys come out healthy because that's going to be a head-on collision.
Once they touch leather to face, those game plans are out the way. You know, we know it's going to be crazy.
A ton is at stake, and these modern-day gladiators atop perhaps the most stacked card of the year so far only have so long before they make that walk. And when the cage door locks behind them, there's only one certainty. Grenades will fly. Let's take an inside look into UFC 313. The questions that loom over the UFC 313 co-main event are plentiful. How much does the lightweight living legend Justin Gaethje have left to give at the top level? Is the resurgent Dan Hooker finally ready to break into the truly elite ranks again? And most importantly, what happens when a pair of seasoned hammers collide over 5 rounds? Because that's an important point. The UFC has once again opted to give this fight the full 25-minute treatment.
A lightweight banger for key title contention as Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker meet.
These guys have been around so long. I am legitimately terrified for them. I am worried about the kind of damage both of them will probably take in this one.
Like, there is no way around that fight being a bludgeoning.
Dan, you fought some guys who are keen to brawl, and Justin Gaethje might be the face of that club.
One of the hardest hitters, one of the best anti-wrestlers, and one of the baddest motherfuckers in the game.
It is so hard in modern-day mixed martial arts to be equal parts elite and entertaining.
We've often talked about him as being the most violent man in the most violent sport.
We're about to paint a violent picture, man.
This fight is gonna end, no matter whether his arm gets raised, my arm gets raised, and then I'm going straight on a stretcher, straight into the back of an ambulance, and I'm going to the hospital. That's how this night is gonna end, baby.
Last time we saw Justin Gaethje, the outlook was pretty bleak. We've watched him get finished before, but seeing him get flatlined by Max Holloway was something entirely different. Yes, he suffered that knockout against Max Holloway, but he's still bloody Justin Gaethje. If he doesn't take that fight, in an alternate reality, he probably still went on to fight Islam Makhachev for the title. If he beats Dan Hooker, that's the problem solved. So now, coming into a clash with the battle-tested, hard-nosed veteran that is Dan Hooker, will we finally witness a version of the highlight who is a little less quick to pull the trigger, a little less willing to bite down on his mouthpiece and trade? And perhaps even more importantly, will his chin even be able to handle the heat? Because standing in front of him will be a fully realized version of Dan Hooker, a man who is finally finding his elite wins within this stacked lightweight top 10.
I love this shit. Dan's a savage.
Trust me.
I love watching him come back into the top 5 now.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that he did that.
Dude, when was the last time Dan Hooker was in a boring fight? I don't think ever. True. The new Dan Hooker with new hair, the new tats. I like that, Dan Hooker.
Jalen Turner and Mateusz Gamrot were fighters who could have very easily used Hooker as a stepping stone in their own ascent. But Hooker's heart and experience proved too much for them.
Does he deserve to be ranked? Is he a top 10 quality fighter? Can he grapple? I feel like I've answered all 3 of those questions.
What fans will be clamoring to find out next is whether it'll be too much for Gaethje.
This is one of those kinds of fights where, yeah, it could end early, but if it doesn't, these two are going to tear each other to pieces.
The question here isn't who will win, but rather who will break the other, physically or mentally.
Neither one of these guys wins that fight.
Honestly.
The only winner of that fight is going to be everyone sitting on the couch watching it.
Like most fights that these two are in, this is surely the betting favorite for Fight of the Night honors before a single punch is thrown.
Best live show on earth, March 8th. Do not miss it.
As much as Gaethje versus Hooker is a bout that looks destined to be a highly intriguing thriller, the real questions will be answered in the top fight.
Alex Pereira has got a lot of favorable matchups, I guess you could say. This is absolutely not, and I will be annoyed if Magomed Ankalaev goes out there and at least doesn't try to grapple him a little bit, because if he just stands in front of him, another one who lost out on their chance because they get, I guess, like sucked up in the aura or style of Alex Pereira.
Alex Pereira's rise almost feels unreal, like he's a character in a video game, steamrolling through the opposition and shattering milestones as if the difficulty was set to easy. Except this isn't a fantasy. This is a stone-faced warrior who was built for destruction and whose presence alone is suffocating. An aura so overwhelming it breaks opponents before the first strike even lands.
Everybody knows he's working with some shamans. He believes in some spiritual help from them.
To say he's not in your head when you're worried about magic he's going to use on you is bullshit. And when he stands across the octagon from you and he has this death stare in his eyes, you're just terrified to get touched by this guy, because it really is all it takes. One touch, you're out.
He just knocks them dead.
He's doing something you simply don't see every day from a superstar, putting himself directly into danger's path just to see how he performs.
He fought a tough Khalil Rountree Jr., but once again, he remains a champion.
But for as much as 2024 was truly a special year for Poatan, one problem remained. Guys like Jiri Prochazka, Jamahal Hill, and Khalil Rountree are all dangerous and worthy opponents. Don't get me wrong. But their willingness to trade on the feet with one of the greatest kickboxers of his era was pretty much a guarantee as soon as the fights were booked. The light heavyweight division is partly to blame here, given how few genuine wrestlers seem to be breaking into the top 10 at the moment. But the shadow of one legitimate threat to the champion could not be ignored any longer. And now, finally, after what seemed like an eternity of denying him the shot, the UFC have given Magomed Ankalaev his second shot at UFC Gold.
Ankalaev has got to be breathing a sigh of relief, like, thank God I'm finally getting this title fight.
The man has got insane big, he's strong, he's angry, he feels that he's been overlooked in this division, and that's going to make him extremely dangerous.
In some ways, it's understandable. His first attempt at the belt against Jan Blachowicz didn't exactly convince us that he was a fighter who was willing to fight as if his life depended on it in there. But other than some odd decision-making in the cage from time to time, Magomed Ankalaev represents the worst stylistic matchup for Pereira in the division right now. And a guy who, while definitely solid on the feet, has that Dagestan wrestling pedigree in his back pocket. Something that could well prove to be a kryptonite for Poatan's masterful striking offense.
Does Ankalaev have a lot to prove here? Yes, he does. No question. Absolutely. But in a way, doesn't Poatan also have a little bit to prove here in terms of you got to fight a #1 ranked guy in this division who can maybe wrestle you, who maybe should have been champ himself quite some time ago, and you've been fighting these guys who are just going to slug it out with you, and he's not necessarily going to be that guy. This is somebody who, in theory, in Ankalaev, can wrestle him, can certainly control him on the ground. There's really no question about that.
With all that being said, Ankalaev said he's not wrestling him.
If he does that, he's a moron.
The interesting thing about the fight is people think they don't want Ankalaev to beat you because he's going to wrestle you. But if you actually look at his fight stats, he's not the typical Dagestani wrestler who goes in there and just tries to take you down.
Такое маленькое послание делать Тишире. Не стоит тратить время на борьбу. Я могу Перейру нокаутировать тоже так же в стойке. Так как его уже нокаутировали на много вес меньше, на 84 килограмм, а на 93, я думаю, ему будет очень tijelo в скором времени почувствовать это.
Vou nocautear o Alex. Isso aí, pô, ele pode falar, entendeu? Ele tá treinando, tá confiante. Pô, é isso. A gente vai ver lá no dia.
The flow state that saw Pereira rip through Khalil Rountree in that insane fourth-round display might not come as easily for him this time, because there's a chance he'll be thinking about his defensive wrestling constantly in this fight, even if Ankalaev says he wants to stand and trade.
Now, Magomed Ankalaev said all along he's not going to wrestle him, and he's not an Islam, he's not a Habib, but he does come from Dagestan, and we have seen him wrestle before. And if it comes down to it, he probably will use it again. When you're in a fight situation, sometimes if you're taking shots and you're about to get knocked out and your head's beating all over the place, it's fight or flight.
I strongly advise him to shoot for the takedowns in the early minutes of the fight. And I can see even Ankalaev getting the takedown, but not finish Poatan. They're gonna go back to the feet, and then Poatan is just too good.
And I honestly think he is going to play the game with Pereira as far as he will try to just stand up with him for a lot of it. Now, I do think he will try to take him down.
I think he'll stand, but he's either got to be all the way in, closing that distance, making it a clinch fight, or he's got to be all the way out. We saw what happened with the Jan Blachowicz fight where he got kicked to the shins and all of a sudden he couldn't walk.
On paper, this might not be the most extravagant matchup of Poatan's career, but as a relative newcomer to mixed martial arts, even now, you gotta imagine that he and his team will see far more danger in this fight than any other.
Olhando para o estilo de luta dele, é cara comum, né? Claro, cara perigoso, mas pô, tô preparado para isso e tenho minhas armas, as minhas estratégias que vai ser muito bom para ele.
Ты допускаешь, что он может попасть?
Даже близко. Я думаю, вот с его скоростью он не коснется меня вообще. Максимум, что он может достать, вот лоу-кик он может не достать. Я думаю, с рук он не коснется до меня. Почему? Я настолько уверен в себе, что я могу его в стойке даже побить. Но я хочу его избить, я хочу просто напасть на него, просто показать, что я лучше него.
Ankalaev has been talking mad trash.
He said, I'm going to punish you for ducking me, and I'm going to make you look like a guy who works in a tire shop. He goes to all the UFC fights to get free alcohol and camera time. March 8th, the alcohol will not help you.
It is personal between the two of them. I mean, if you ask Alex Pereira, he's just another guy.
E se esse cara não fazer o que ele falou, as pessoas já viram zoando os outros adversários, e é o cara que eu vou zoar.
If Magomed gets the win, he'll use it as a springboard to real acclaim, marking yet another huge moment for fighters from his region. But if it's Poatan that gets his hand raised, it'll be a win that answers perhaps the biggest unknown about his mixed martial arts career so far. And who knows, maybe it could present him with enough closure at 205 to test the waters up at heavyweight.